Hi, and welcome to AHA, the coaching show. Now, on tonight's show, we have Victor Loke. Victor is a Scrum Alliance certified team leader, an organizational coach, and previously an experienced computer scientist, and now the founder and executive director of Visionary Agility. Now, with that, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for
Now,
inviting me.
Now, Victor, for a start, we want to delve on a topic that we've not dealt before, which is basically Scrum and also Agile organization. But before that, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional journey?
Sure. As you've briefly introduced, I founded Visionary Agility, a coaching practice based in Singapore. So I'm primarily an organizational coach and an industry trainer. I started my career as a circuit design engineer, actually, some 16 years ago. So I graduated from the National University of Singapore with a computer engineering degree. So I was a very technical person, someone who was acutely interested in things rather than people. And I was at this for a while, for 6.5 years before moving on to banking as a high frequency trading execution engine developer, working on field programmable gate arrays. It was a short stint. I then moved on to rejoin my alma mater, NUS, as a spacecraft engineer and project manager. During that time, I've had the privilege of guiding the success of two satellite launches, the Kentridge 1 and Galacia microsatellites. And then I took my next turn as a founder of a company analytics spin-off from NUS before joining an AI and data science consulting firm based in Bangkok, and then starting my current practice, Visionary Agility. So throughout my career, I've seen myself evolve as someone who was acutely interested in technology and things to someone who is now deeply interested in people. So that's where I'm
Now,
at
Victor,
now.
that's such an interesting background, and which also then brings us to have a conversation around something that we really haven't covered in our coaching show, which is
Mhm.
really the agile organization. Tell us a bit about an agile organization and why it's important.
Sure. So Agile as a movement is not new. The recognition that companies needed to be adaptive and nimble started somewhere in the late 70s to early 80s with various discoveries from thought leaders of the time, in primarily in software engineering. And what they found out at the time was that um, when it came to developing software, the traditional approach of manage managing a company like, for example, a manufacturing or of a generic industry doesn't quite apply to the software domain. Reason being, things in software evolve so fast and customer requirements change all the time. And they don't actually know what they want their product to actually look like. And so that a number of discoveries were made in the decades that followed around why that is, right? And today, what we recognize um, to be the case essentially, or the situation that all companies today find themselves in, are that we are all in a highly disruptable business environment, right? All companies are finding themselves needing to adapt and adjust themselves, tweak their business models much faster than they've had to. And hence the notion of agile and the recognition that companies needed to be nimble, needed to be responsive to market changes and environmental changes. So, and with the technology disruptions as of late, particularly with generative AI, we are seeing this happen perhaps even faster than it used to be in the last decade.
So, Victor, then how does being a Scrum Alliance certified team leader, how does that play into this whole overall coaching around Agile?
Great question. The one important thing to recognize about agile organizations are that fundamentally we rely on the collective intelligence of the people doing the work to solve the most challenging of business problems that the organization is facing. And what that requires is the ability for teams and individuals to make decisions, important decisions for the company, without having to perhaps seek approval from management or senior management. So they have highly empowered teams and individuals. And being a team coach, my primary the primary value that I bring to organizations would be to guide their leaders in understanding how to create an agile organization, help their teams understand why it's important to be self-managing, to adopt greater responsibility, and essentially be able to think and act for themselves in response to market changes.
But Victor, this is, and let's look at a more local context and out of the multinational context. The multinationals perhaps are a little bit from a decision making because of the way they are structured globally. Obviously, decision making tends to be a little bit more decentralized in a lot of ways, but not the case in an SME, for example. Whether it's in Singapore, whether it's Malaysia, whether it's in Indonesia, SMEs tend to be very, in general, and I'm generalizing here, very top down. But then a lot of founders and also business owners realize they have to evolve or their lunch will be eaten, basically. Give us a perspective then on how you then do perhaps and through examples that perhaps you have implemented before, how do you then transform say an SME that is very successful at this point of time, founder driven, maybe second generation is taking over the business? How do you then transform them into an agile organization?
Oh, wow. Okay. Big and important question. Thanks for asking that. Well, first and foremost, it's important to understand why they are seeking such a transformation. Oftentimes, it's nothing more than, or perceived to be nothing more than a buzzword and an approach, perhaps, that most organizations are adopting today to become successful. And rarely are there reasons compelling enough in the situation that you've sort of described, where we want to guide an organization towards agile change. But that said, therefore, the conversation with the executive becomes really important about why the desire. And perhaps they do recognize that it is time for their organization to rejuvenate and to reinvent themselves. And in which case, an agile change initiative might be valuable for them.
And Victor, and let me plant a little bit of a more detailed scenario to this. This is a very common
Sure.
thing in ASEAN right now. Generational change of leadership. Father is handing over the reins to the children. Children
Yeah.
realize that they need to move. And this
Yeah.
is really that catalyst for wanting to facilitate change.
So, generational gap, essentially, would that be what you are?
So again, then how would you then assist this? And so if I'm in a scenario where I'm taking over my family business, I've been working with my father for many years, and my sister and I now are going to be handed over the reins. Obviously, my father will still be guiding us, but we're taking over. We
Yes.
realize that we need to evolve. Our organization needs to
Mm,
evolve. How can you help us in that journey to be more agile and be an
mm,
agile organization so that the supervisor level can make decisions?
okay. So there are two things primarily. The first of which is the handing over the reins, right, to the next generation owner, and the second being the delegation of decision rights to the supervisory level. So one thing that's important to recognize about any leadership change is that the leader has changed. And anytime the leader changes, the culture automatically will change as a given. And so it's vitally important to educate the new leadership that any change that's undertaken by the organization is best guided by the desires and intent of the workers and the larger organizations themselves than by the leader when it comes to agile change. And the reason for that is that a fundamental attribute of agile organizations are the team's ability to self-manage and make decisions for themselves. In the case wherein the leader imposes his or her desire for the organization to be agile, is fundamentally anti-agile,
Okay,
right?
interesting. Fundamentally anti-agile. Tell us why.
Because the leadership is imposing their desires.
But then isn't that a
So,
catalyst because you know you're doing things and let's continue the same example. I'm the autocratic founder. I it's my way. Leadership style has been it's my way or the highway before. The children have worked under this, understand the limitations. Now that they've said, okay, we have to deal with pa until we have to deal with pa. Now we don't have to deal with pa. Let's run the organization our way. But then the next generation of leader is setting the sister and brother are setting the tone for this. But why would you say that's anti-agile? And then how would we do that? Because we would have to, for example, have a town hall meeting and say, hey, we want you to get more involved. Give us an idea of a process that you would go through to help this company.
excellent. So yes, why do I say it's anti-agile? So it's not by invitation, it's compelled change. See, anytime the organization is forced to act on a leader's desires, mean they don't get to make the decisions about how or what they work on, right? That takes this. So essentially, the transition from a traditional organization to an agile organization entails the delegation of decision right and authority to the teams. So many new age leaders understand that, but it's the process by which this happens that many fail to grasp, and
Okay.
and that's essentially to your point about how do we then do it, right? And um, what I advocate for, right, is really to operate right from the start using a self-managing approach, which is an intervention that invites the organization's people to partake in a game
Okay.
to design how the organization would look like moving forward. An example of such an intervention is a large group or large scale meeting like open space technology or the World Cafe or similar interventions.
And so that's the starting point. And then what about a journey? So we do that. The employees are all excited, but remember, for the last 30 years, they've been directed.
Yes.
So how do we get them? Because so change doesn't happen, and this is a change management challenge. Change doesn't happen overnight. How do
Yes.
you then handhold them in order to then get them to make that transformation that they are making decisions on the spot? So they're not checking, for example, all the time that when they have to deal with, and let's talk about a retail store. So let's say this is a retail organization. A lot of times in the past, everything is done, whether it's ordering and stuff. The big boss, the pa needs to make a decision. How about
Mm.
today when we empower them at the store level? How do we
Mm.
do that? How do we, as the new leadership, do that?
Great question. We do that by coaching. Now,
Okay.
this is where coaching becomes key, or coaching is key to a successful agile change in an organization. Like you described, people are not going to adopt greater responsibility and initiative on their own. They're going to need some guidance or hand-holding, as you've described it, right? But what we really want to do is to help induce that awareness on their part on why they are acting to the norm of expecting direction and instructions, and inviting them to consider how they would like things to be different for themselves and for the organization.
Now, Victor, this is obviously this is a hypothetical scenario that we have gone
Mm,
through, but perhaps could you share some insights into some of your clients and how you've and you don't have to mention the names itself, how you've actually helped them in their through your coaching in terms
mm.
of their journey of evolution?
Yes. So a number of my clients, organizational clients, um, expressed their desire for an agile change, um, coming from the traditional project management, the waterfall approach, project management place where they were starting from. And so essentially, that is one form of transitioning from a traditional organization to an agile one. And there are often similar patterns about the erroneous, perhaps, misinterpretation of what that sort of change would entail, sort of like what you've described, that leaders can simply tell the teams that, okay, now you are free to manage yourselves and free to decide how you want to do the work. But it isn't like that, right? That's the polar opposite of self-management. And so a lot of discoveries and realizations need to be made along the way for both the executive leaders as well as for the teams. And that's where I come in. And for example, I would sit the executives down in the team coaching session and understand the real reason for why they aspire to this agile change. What sort of outcome do they envision for the organization? And most importantly, what are they committed to in supporting this agile change? And a very important, perhaps I would say the keystone pattern for enabling this change is the commitment to delegate decision rights to teams. So once we get that commitment, if they are willing, first and foremost, right, then the next conversation is with the teams, understanding and meeting them where they're at, right? So how much accountability are they willing to adopt as teams, right? Because we talk about empowering teams all the time, but we rarely have this conversation as coaches as to, do the teams actually want this responsibility? Do they want this accountability? Because half the time, no, they don't want that.
And Victor, point taken. In my past experience as well, this is exactly the case. Not many people want to be directed. They
Yes.
don't want the accountability. So how do we then work around that situation? On one hand, they may be that accountability, that lack of willingness to be accountable comes from fear. uh, this fear is one thing. Second reason is sheer laziness. I just come here, I do my job, and that's it. I don't care. But the third one is also the fact that there's no frame of reference. So there's really three elements, and there's no frame of reference. This is how I've always done. Suddenly I'm lost. How do we direct employees like that, perhaps make that leap forward? How would you coach
Guide.
them?
Yeah, guide would be the approach rather than direct, I would suggest.
Okay.
And by that, and through coaching, I mean seeking their own articulation of what it means to adopt greater responsibility. So when I say that, what I mean is, say you have a team where perhaps there are 5 people and 3 of them are not willing to take on the greater responsibility associated with agile change. Then we ask, how much responsibility are you willing to undertake? And what's stopping you from adopting these responsibilities? This would give us a sense of the culture, the existing state of the culture of the organization from which we operate. I think in the example you described, perhaps a lack of psychological safety would be one. Then the coach would be required to turn his or her focus to the environment, the organizational environment and organizational climate, and operating on the environment as a means of fostering change.
Victor, this has really been a fascinating conversation. We could probably speak for another half an hour and go on, but we've run out of time for now. But before we leave, any final thoughts and key takeaways you'd like to leave the audience with about leadership in an agile organization?
Yes, just 2 words: human agency.
Human agency. And could you elaborate on that?
So as an agile leader, we are always tempted to think that we have the answers for the organization. We are always tempted towards control, right? And we are always under the illusion that control would allow us to drive the organization in the right direction. So I would urge everyone to think differently. Think of human agency in the sense of, instead, what can we do to harness the collective wisdom of our organization and our people to serve the interests of the organization? And that primarily is by giving them human agency.
And on that note, Victor, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show. It's been fascinating.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Now, we've been speaking to Victor
Brian.
Loke. Thanks, Victor. We've been speaking to Victor Loke, a Scrum Alliance certified team leader and all-round executive director at Visionary Agility, an organizational coaching company. This has been BizTech's AHA, the coaching show, which is done in conjunction and co-produced in partnership with Corporate Coach Academy. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.